Perfect. All right, so we're going to get started today. And I debated skipping over this lecture and continuing on. Obviously, we had the snafu last week, but then I started thinking about it and felt like, we really need to talk about some of this stuff. And this is my kind of catch-all lecture to talk about how do we organize our digital lives? How do we keep track of all the files? And I think it's really a kind of a good broad overview to those kinds of things that you need to start managing. And given that this is a digital class, we're all on Zoom, it doesn't hurt to really kind of walk through a lot of stuff. So we're going to take today, and I'm going to talk about technology, design, and architecture, kind of how they all work together. We'll talk a little bit about the internet. We'll talk about email, calendar, all kinds of those things. That being said, there is an exercise 102 that'll be due on this coming Sunday, but you don't actually turn anything in. There's no submission required. So it makes life pretty easy. You just get 100% for it. So there's some recommended stuff that'll show up on exercise 102. On Wednesday, we will have exercise 103 and lecture 103. That's where we'll start talking about photography and kind of getting into that realm, which is a good segue into your long Labor Day weekend. That'll be this coming weekend. And that means we won't have class on Monday. So you'll end up with 2 classes this week and then only 1 class the following week because of the holiday. But that also gives you an opportunity to go out and take a bunch of pictures over the Labor Day weekend, which is always a good thing. So we're going to talk today about technology, design, and architecture. And I think this is kind of a good broad overview of kind of keeping track and getting yourself organized. It's good to happen in the beginning of the semester to kind of think about this rather than at the end of the semester when you're panicking and not everything's kind of coming together. So let's talk early. Organizing your digital life. So there's really 2 different ways of thinking about how you organize your file systems. And some of you already have a method by which you organize your files. Other people throw everything on the desktop, and that's incredibly common, believe it or not. So the first method or the first category of organizing your files is basically a flat file system. And that means that there's not a lot of hierarchy. You may have a documents folder or a desktop folder. Maybe you organize it a little bit by, hey, I'm going to put my Illustrator files in an Illustrator folder. My Word files go in a Word folder. Maybe. It also might just be a catch-all where everything goes into one folder. And that's the example of the desktop where you just save everything to the desktop. So this file structure does, of course, have some advantages. The advantages are that it's organized by file type, maybe, or you know where everything is because it must be in there somewhere. The problem is that you end up with really, really large folders. There's lots and lots of files in these folders, and it's hard to find things. Even though you know, quote, where it is, it might take you a while to look through that list and actually find that particular file. It's also very difficult to keep projects separate. So let's say that you have a job and you're doing stuff. Let's say you're a draftsperson for an architecture firm. You have projects that you work on for them. You have projects that you work on for school. If it's a flat file system and everything's saved on your desktop, then you might not know how to separate it out. What belongs to work? What belongs to you, etc. So let's think about a hierarchy, perhaps. And so in a hierarchy system, you're setting it up where you have folders that delineate, for example, classes. So in this example here, let me use my pen to talk a little bit here. Right, so in this example up here, you have your root folder, which would be your documents folder. Then you have a subfolder for school. And when you have that subfolder for school, then you would break it down into individual classes. Maybe you have 130, you have 121, you have 135. And then within one of those folders, so we use 135 as an example, you might have a folder for your assignments. Or it may be flat and you put everything in that folder. Just kind of depends. In this scenario, we have your assignment 1, here's the photos, and then there'd be more stuff here. So you're using that hierarchy structure to kind of get organized. Down below here, you can actually see some of this is a snapshot of one of my folders where we have this class. And then inside of that class, I have several categories: admin, assignments, exercises, lectures, student work. Well, if we look at lectures right here, you can then see that it has folders for every one of the lectures that I do. And then inside of today's lecture, for example, then I'd have files related to today's lecture. So this may seem totally intuitive, but at the same time, it's not a bad way of kind of thinking about how you organize your files. It makes it a lot easier to find your files. And generally, I think of it as I'm working on a specific project. These need to go in a specific folder. And all the files for that folder belong, or that project belong in that one folder. And then we know we have everything. Keeps your project separate. If you have work, if you have school, you have personal files, it keeps all of those separate in little baskets for you. If you need to find all your Word documents, for example, you can always do a search for it. So you kind of get the best of both worlds in this scenario. It takes a little bit of planning ahead of time, but it can be really beneficial. So in here, I'm interpreting this for your OneDrive, right? You have your OneDrive root folder. Actually, we can cross this part out because it's not on your flash drive anymore. It'll be in your OneDrive folder. And then inside of OneDrive, you might have folders for your various classes. And then inside of one of those class folders, you might have folders for assignments or exercises, in here the portfolio, etc. So again, it's keeping yourself organized and keeping that OneDrive organized. Now, the next part of this may revolve around how you choose to name your files. So in this scenario, we're talking about, what do you put? How do you name it? It's not just Untitled 1, Untitled 2, Untitled 3. So the way that I came up with, and I used this very extensively when I was in grad school, and I'm sharing it with you because I thought it was a pretty good way of kind of identifying it. And that was that you create a prefix. And by a prefix, I mean you create something that goes in front of every file related to that particular class. So in this scenario, I did this for an architecture class. The number was 121, and it was taught by Daniel Abbott. So I did A121A. That would be the prefix for anything that happened related to that class. I'd throw that on there. It makes it really easy to find files after the fact, especially if you need to find it 10 years from now and you can't really remember what the file was called. If you know what the class was, you can reverse engineer what this file would be. So the reason that I add the professor last name, that initial there, is because sometimes you have class numbers that repeat. So in the higher level studios, you might have a 200 studio series, and you might take that 3 times. So you need a way of differentiating. So at your level, is it really relevant? Probably not, but it's just one extra little step to kind of make yourself be a little bit more organized. Then we go to the suffix, the end part. Now, a lot of you already name your files with a number at the end, and that's very, very common. I took that a step further in my files where I had both an addition and a version. So the addition, this one, the number, is a big step, and the version is a small step. So let's say, for example, I was working on a final rendering for my Rhino class. The addition would be major changes. So I changed the view angle, and it's completely different. The version would be tweaks to the rendering. I changed that lighting a little bit. I changed that material a little bit. And as I'm going, I'm saving these versions so that if I find that I didn't like what I had or what the change that I made, I can easily go back. So it's just a fine tuning of the numbering scheme. If you want to just stick with numbering, there's nothing wrong with that. That would go at the end. So now if we combine it, we put this A121A in the front. That would be designating a particular class. The end has to do with the addition and the version. And whatever happens in here, this space in here, I don't care what you put in there. You can put anything you want in there. And then the dot extension, that's the file type. And that comes naturally with the operating system. So that's how I would name my files. Now I'm here talking about, oh, this is how I would name my files. You should do it this way. It doesn't necessarily mean that my way is right. It may not be right at all. And you may find that your own method is far better than what I've come up with. And if that's the case, great, let me know and I'll change my method. This is just a way of thinking about it. And that's what I'm asking you to do today is instead of going at this blind, let's look at it as a big picture and how can we actually improve what we're doing? How can we be a little bit more organized this semester than we were last semester? A couple notes about file names. Now, if you're only working on your computer, having spaces in the file names makes no difference. And actually, I've gotten lazy and I've started putting spaces in my file names. If you're uploading, it's better to use a dash or an underscore because the web addresses don't like spaces. If you've ever typed into your search bar up at the top, your address bar on a web browser, and you put a space in, it immediately takes whatever it is and throws it into Google rather than going to a particular address. So it can complicate things. So if you're planning on uploading a lot of this document, you might want to think about keeping the spaces out. I'd also stay away from slashes or question marks or extra periods in the file names, because that can confuse your operating system. Most of the time it doesn't, but it's worth noting that it can be something that kind of complicates things a bit. So the next piece that I want to talk today about is backup. And I'll probably overemphasize this, but it's really important that you get used to it and you start thinking about it on really an everyday basis. And that is, how am I taking care of my files so that if something were to happen and I were to lose my computer, would I be okay? And I'll tell you right now that it happens all the time. My guess is that if I surveyed you and asked how many of you have had your computer crash such that you lost files, almost all of you would say yes. If you weren't in that group, you probably will have it happen this semester, no offense, right? It's just the kind of thing that happens to all of us. And we all have stories about how it happened. And I'm going to diverge a little bit from the lecture and tell you a couple stories, because I think sometimes those stories really help to identify the things that can happen. So I had a student one time, this is a long time ago, this is maybe 10 years ago. I had a student come up to me at the final. She showed up to the final and she said, I can't believe it. I can't believe it. Can I just give you a hug? And I'm like, okay, well, that's a little weird, but yeah, I guess. Okay. She said, you talked about in the very beginning of the class, you talked about backing up your work. And I said, yeah. She said, well, I backed up my work and I'm so thankful that I paid attention to that lecture, because I got out of my car yesterday and I ran in, I don't know, she went into Starbucks or, something like that. And she said, somebody broke out her passenger window, reached in, grabbed her laptop and walked away with it. She had all her work for all her classes on that computer. If she hadn't backed up her work, she wouldn't have been able to turn it in for the final and she wouldn't have been able to pass the class. So those are really important lessons to learn. Me personally, I had two failures that happened. The first one was kind of funny. I was with my kids and we were going to pick out a Christmas tree. This was in December of one year, right kind of leading up into finals. And I had my laptop in my truck sitting kind of in the center console. I also had my dog in the back. Well, we got out and we left, and my kids were like, hey, let's have hot chocolate. So we had a hot chocolate and I brought it back. They didn't drink it all and I put it in the cup holder in the center console of my truck. Didn't think about it, left it there. We went out to do something else. I came back, my dog had climbed from the back seat into the front seat, knocked the hot chocolate over, spilled the entire cup of hot chocolate onto my laptop, but my laptop had been turned so that the vents were facing up in my laptop bag. So not only did it get on my laptop, it actually poured all the chocolate directly inside of every one of the vents on the back side of my laptop. Needless to say, that laptop didn't work again. I had one other experience, and that was during finals. I was in my office at DVC. I hit submit on my final grades for the semester, and my hard drive froze and died, unrecoverable. So these things do happen. Now, in both of those cases, I'm a big proponent of backing up my files. I always have my files backed up. I didn't lose a single thing because I followed some basic principles about backing up your files. And that's what I'm hoping to inspire you to do. So this is not my creation. This is actually something that came from a multimedia guild of artists called the Pixel Corps. They believe in keeping 3 copies of your files. You have one primary copy, that's the one that you work on, and you have 2 backup copies. This starts to seem really daunting, but it's actually not that hard. So that's principle 3. This is principle 2, and you'll see 1. So it's 3, 2, 1 backup. 3 copies, 2 different mediums. So we're storing it on 2 different things. We're storing it on your hard drive on your computer, and we're storing it somewhere, like in the cloud. We're storing it on a flash drive. We're storing it in, a DVD drive. We're storing it in a solid state drive, right? We're trying to separate it out so it's stored in 2 different ways. In the old days, this was more important because some things were subject to magnetic fields, right? Your old hard drives before they were solid state were always subject to magnetic fields. And when that was the case, right, if you accidentally put your laptop near a magnet, it might erase part of the hard drive. So now it's not so important. The solid state drives, the flash drives are a lot more durable than they were. However, if you keep it on a flash drive, it's really easy to leave it in your pocket and have it go through the wash. So these things do happen. 2 different mediums, 3 copies, 2 different mediums, and 1 copy should always not be with you. So one should be off-site. This used to be hard. Now it's super easy. And what I mean by this is you're using OneDrive, you're using Dropbox, you're using Google Drive, and those things, those services, are keeping a copy of your file somewhere else. That's the catastrophic, my house burns down, I still have a copy. So we're covering all those bases. 3, 2, 1, backup. So you're saying, well, wait a minute, I'm using the remote desktop on the school machine. How does this work? Well, we can still do this principle. So you have a copy that's on the remote desktop. That's your working copy. Now, we all know that the remote desktop will kick you off after 30 minutes and then another 15 minutes of idle time. So it's not a permanent copy, but while you're working on it, you have that copy. Then you're going to log into OneDrive and make sure you save that copy on your OneDrive account. So that then satisfies the second copy. It also gives us an offsite. That's the one principle, where one is offsite away from you. So that's good. So all we're missing is that one last copy. Well, how's that part work? Well, you install Dropbox or OneDrive or whatever on your home computer, and magically that file appears on your home computer. There's your third copy. So we've just satisfied the 3, 2, 1 principle on the remote desktop by using OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever. I'm going to use OneDrive pretty extensively in this class because it comes with your student account and it works really nicely on the lab computers. Then we get into automating. So if backups don't happen automatically, they won't happen at all. So if you come home and you say, you know what, I'm going to make sure every time after work, I'm going to copy all my files onto an external hard drive, never going to happen. So it has to happen in the background. So that's where OneDrive or one of the online backups works really nicely, is it just automatically takes care of it. There are built-in options. You can have Time Machine on the Mac. Windows 10 has a file backup feature that will do this for you. There are aftermarket solutions. There's a program called Chronosync, which I think is particularly nice on the Mac, that lets you do kind of good backups and copies and whatever. SuperDuper does a full copy of your whole disk. So if you ever needed to wipe your hard drive or something, you could create a full copy of it. And there's a bunch of other options that are here, should you be interested in setting up backups. And then we have online backup solution. We have Dropbox. A lot of people are familiar with that. That was an early player in this field where they did a lot of the early backup stuff. It's kind of been replaced by Google Drive and OneDrive. OneDrive will give you 25 gigs for free. I think they might have upped it by now with your DVC email. So that's great. There are other programs that you can pay for to get more space. If you're worried about security, you can actually run your own cloud. That's that option down here at the bottom where you can have your own server and do your own backups that way. So there's lots of options out there. iCloud, I should have put iCloud on there. If you're on the Mac, you can do a lot of work with your iCloud account as well. So the idea here is that these backups should be occurring really all the time. So every time you save a file, it should happen. And that's where the online backups are really excellent, because they're constantly doing it. It's far less likely that you're going to lose something, but at least nightly. And then we're talking about, weekly, monthly, you get the idea, semesterly. So this is actually a good place to make a backup. When you finish a class, if you take all the files from that class and you put them on a hard drive or something and then set that hard drive aside, when you go back and try to find something later on, you'll be able to go back to that hard drive and get it. So there was some stuff, I was going back and working on a portfolio. This was when I was applying to grad school. And there was some work that I had done as an undergrad that I really wanted to include. I did this one bridge design and I wanted to include it in my portfolio. And unfortunately, I couldn't find any of the files for it. And that was because I didn't have these semesterly backups. So if you start making a copy of all those files, putting them on a hard drive, it's a great way to be able to go back and say, oh, I have those files from back when I did that, and easily find them. And then, of course, we have things like the yearly, etc. And then you can have offsite. So this is the kind of hardcore solution. So and I always tell this story because I think it's a good story. It's a good way of putting you in the right frame of mind to think about it. And this is a story that my wife experienced firsthand. So she grew up in the Central Valley. And she was, away from home. She was with her mom, and her dad called and said the levee near her town is going to break, and it's going to either break on one side or it's going to break on our side, in which case we're expecting a flood. So I have an hour at home. What do you want me to get out of your room? Well, if you stop and think about that, that's a really important question. What would you take if you only had an hour, if you only had 30 minutes? I mean, we have these experiences with wildfires where you've got to suddenly leave, and maybe you know people that have gone through this. What would you grab? What's really important? So when I think about that, when I think about what's really important, I think about, is there a way to preserve that somewhere where I'm not going to lose it? So the thing that's really important for me are my photos. So I actually go to the effort of copying my photos, and this is not as up to date as I'd like. Obviously I have online backups of this stuff, but I actually copy my photos onto a hard drive, and I go stick it in my safety deposit box at the bank, because I know I'll have all those preserved if something were to happen to my house. So is it an extreme example? Absolutely. But sometimes it's a good strategy. So you think about, where can you put this stuff, or how easily can you grab it if that catastrophe were to come? So let's shift gears. I know that was a little bit of a doom and gloom here, but I think it's important to think about it actively rather than pretend that it doesn't exist. So let's talk a little bit about calendars. You guys are approaching the beginning of a semester, and you have to think about, how am I going to stay organized? And if you don't have a calendar, you're going to be disorganized, and you're probably going to be late on some stuff. So generally speaking, you're going to keep different calendars for your work, for your school, and for your personal events. Maybe it all goes on one, but I think it would be a good strategy to keep them separate. Then you can kind of turn on and turn off certain pieces of it as you go forward. If you can subscribe to a calendar, that's even better. I dislike the calendar system that is in Canvas, because I don't think it's particularly portable or usable outside of the Canvas system. It works, but I think it would be nice to have integration with like Google Calendar or something. And I'm disappointed that they don't. I've requested that several times, but as of right now, they don't seem to have it. Make sure that the calendars sync with the devices you use, right? So if you're all in the Apple ecosystem, that's great. You can use iCloud and it'll sync to all your computer and your phone and your iPad and whatever. But if you have an Android phone, or if you have a Windows computer, you want to make sure that somehow those calendars are syncing across all of those devices. And so maybe then you're using Google Calendar instead of Apple's calendar system. All of the major players, Google, Yahoo, Outlook, Apple, they all have good online calendars. The Apple one, I think, is part of your iCloud subscription, though, so it's not free. But Google has a free one, Yahoo has a free one, Outlook has a free one. And so you can use those really easily to create good quality calendars. And you can obviously do that online. You guys probably have all seen these before. Guess what? It's a calendar. But these calendars are just examples. So here's our Google Calendar. Yeah, there's the, that's still Google Calendar. Here's the Outlook calendar. It's just set up slightly differently. And then there's the Yahoo calendar. Then we move into email. So the average person has at least 3 email accounts. One is the account that you use for friends and family. One is your work or school account. And one is that spam account that you open, or that old account that you opened when you were a young kid and you don't really use anymore. Truth be told, a lot of people have more than 3 email accounts, but these are the big 3, generally speaking. The number of emails sent by humanity is somewhere in the 235 billion. Actually, it's probably higher than that now. And that was a 2018 study, so it's out of date. The average person sends and receives 121 emails a day. If you think about it, that's a lot of attention. It's a lot of things vying for your attention. I think I'm way higher than 121 emails a day. I think I'm up in the 300 or 400 emails a day. It's kind of scary when you think about it. Email ads spending is 350 million, right? 93% of business-to-business marketers use email marketing, right? So we can go through these statistics. I don't have to read them all to you, right? 99% of consumers check their personal emails at least once every day. So it's a lot of facts about email. There's a lot of email flying around. So what do we do about it? We get 121 emails per day on average. How do we address that problem? So first off, you want to strip down into the fewer email boxes. If you have 10 different email addresses, let's get them consolidated into 1. Let's get them consolidated into 2. Maybe it's just your work and your personal. I don't mind you having that spam one out there. That's fine, that you give to the weird marketers and stuff, because you don't really check that too much. So you want to decide which email addresses you want to use and then stick with them. You want to enable all your spam filters. Be judicious about marking spam emails. So flag them as spam as much as you can, because machine learning will kick in and more of those emails will go into your spam folder. I'd like to say be cautious about unsubscribing, because it depends on what you're unsubscribing from. I used to be a big proponent of unsubscribe from everything, but I actually don't think it works. If you're, let's say you have a Pottery Barn subscription where they're sending your emails and you say unsubscribe, okay, that's pretty reasonable. It's a big company. They'll probably respect that and stop sending you emails. If it's anything smaller, I don't know that I'd trust that they'd actually unsubscribe. A lot of times they look at it as, hey, this person actually read my email, so I'm going to keep sending them stuff. So instead of unsubscribing, unless it's a known company, just mark it as spam and get it filtered out into the spam. Okay. There's a really great TED Talk, and I'll post this email link or this YouTube link where there's a guy who actually decides he's going to respond to a scammer. And he talks through all this back and forth, and it's awfully good. So there's a YouTube link for you. That's your bonus homework for right now. So when we talk about forwarding email to another email address, right? So this is inside of Gmail. If you go into your settings and then you look for this tab, the forwarding and pop IMAP, right here, you can choose to forward a copy of incoming mail to, and then you pick your email address, and then you can tell Gmail what to do with the balance. You can go ahead and archive Gmail's copy. So by forwarding this, you're saying take it from one address into another address. And a lot of times this happens when you switch to a more professional email address. So maybe right now you have, superhotdad123@gmail.com, and you decided to go to work and you say, yeah, maybe that's not the most professional email, and I want to switch that to, grantadams@gmail.com or whatever. Sometimes maybe people have that old email and you want to make sure it gets to your new email, and you want to be a little bit more professional, so you forward the old email into the new email. Forwarding in Outlook's pretty easy too, right? So here's our forwarding, start forwarding, boop, type in the email address, and then do you want to keep a copy of the forwarded emails? That one's pretty easy in Outlook. The other thing that you can do is you can use an email client that gets you through your email quickly. I use this program called Spark to read my email. I think it's fantastic, and it's gesture-based, so you can really easily flick through things. So you can mark as spam with a long flick, a short flick marks as read, etc. The one thing that I love about it is there's also in this the ability to flag and come back into your inbox later. So I can say, I can't deal with this now, remind me in a certain amount of time, bring this back in 2 days, bring it back this weekend, and I'll deal with it. And it'll automatically bring it back into your inbox. So for me, that really helps when you're looking at it. This is their email program right there. So it's something worth a try. It's free, so it might be worth giving it a shot if you're struggling with your email. Another thing that's great, that's free, it's offered by Google, is something called Google Voice. You can get a unique phone number that can follow you. So it's a permanent phone number. You can give it to people and it'll always work. You can choose where it's going to be forwarded to. You can also choose where you want the number located. So if you want a California number, or if you want a number from somewhere else, you can get it. It has an app for your phone. You can also forward both texts and emails into your phone. So it's really kind of a good way of giving away your phone number, but not really giving away your phone number. You can also do custom greetings for different groups in your contacts. So depending on who's calling, you might be able to do different voicemail greetings, etc. And it does also transcribe any voicemail that somebody leaves you into text format and send you an email or send you a text with that information. So it's a free service. It's kind of fun. So now we'll go from all of that stuff into architecture or design and the web. How do we develop an online identity for yourself? And so this is something that ends up being important long term. So let's start with how the internet works. Some of you already know this, but I think it's worth kind of talking about it. Basically, there's a bunch of computers that sit out there, and when you type in google.com or apple.com, there's a service, it's kind of like a reversed phone book, that says apple.com, this is the physical address of the server for apple.com. And this is a while back, so I don't know that the server is still there, but 17.172.224.47 at one time was the server address location, like the physical address of the machine that hosted Apple's website. And so if you were to type in 17.172.224.47, it would take you to apple.com. Now if you had to remember oh, I need to go visit Apple, it's 17.172, but that's really hard. So instead, we have this system that translates words into those physical addresses. And this is what one of those server rooms looks like. When I talk about a computer, it's not like a desktop computer sitting there. It's a powerhouse of computers that are all networked together that host that particular web page. And so we use a browser to get to that. So we have Microsoft Edge, Internet Explorer, those come on Windows. Safari is the one that comes on Mac. And then we have the outliers. We have Google Chrome, we have Firefox, and we have Opera. Not that anybody actually uses that. Most people use Chrome in this day and age. It's very fast and very good. But if you're on a Mac, there's a lot of people that use Safari. If you're on Windows, you might use Microsoft Edge, though a lot of times people use Chrome on Windows. So you want to think about what kinds of add-ons you might be able to tack onto your browser. Sometimes this is good. Ad blockers, for example, those can be useful. Remember, a lot of times people that are posting content make money from the advertisements. So I always feel bad about using too much of an ad blocker. But at the same time, sometimes the ads are just really, really annoying and you want to get rid of them. Most of the browsers in this day and age are very, very fast. The Chrome and Safari are built on WebKit, which is the fastest browser at the moment. That doesn't mean that it's not going to change. But I will bring up one other thing. And that's a big one that I bet a lot of you haven't heard of before. Something called cross-site tracking. And this is a way that companies and websites start to learn your habits, learn your behaviors. And with cross-site tracking enabled, which is default on a lot of machines, they will set these little cookies, these little things that track what you're doing, and those little things report back. And so companies can learn a lot about you. The good news is that this is an easy way there's an easy way of getting rid of it. So if you're in Chrome, you can go into your privacy and security settings, and you can come over here and turn on Do Not Track with your browsing traffic. And it'll eliminate the ability of these websites to install those little cookies and track you from website to website. It's one thing if you're on a website and they're tracking you. You go to Amazon.com and they immediately know that you're looking for X or whatever it is. That's because you're on Amazon and they're going to keep feeding that back to you. It's another thing for you to go to some random website and look at, I don't know, hard drives. And then when you get to Amazon, they present you with a bunch of hard drives because they knew you were looking for hard drives somewhere else. So that's what we're trying to eliminate here by sending the Do Not Track request. So that's available in Chrome. In Safari, it's under privacy right here. And you check this box for prevent cross-site tracking. So I think it's a good idea. And I think it's worth going through the effort of setting that up for your own browsers. Wi-Fi. That's another big one. Are you actually being safe? We're so used to Wi-Fi and Wi-Fi connections that we don't ever stop and think about how exposed computers can be when they're on a public Wi-Fi network. Now, if you're on your own computer network at your house, not something to worry about too much. However, if you're out in public somewhere, you're at Starbucks, be aware you're exposed. And if people are really trying to sniff you out, if they're trying to get information from you, they theoretically can for any website that's not SSL encrypted. So if you go to your bank account, you go to Bank of America, you go to Citibank, those are all encrypted connections. And you'll see it at the top. It'll say HTTPS, HTTPS, that's the key part there, whatever. If it has that S, you're good to go, nothing to worry about. But if it's just the plain HTTP, theoretically, somebody can sniff what you're working on. They can see what you're doing. They can intercept your traffic and be aware. The other thing that people do is that they a lot of times will share files. So they'll have a wide open desktop, or they won't have locked their computer down. I've heard of people sitting in the airport, these are computer people that I know, who will go around and look for people with open shares on their computers, and they'll put files on people's desktops saying, hey, by the way, I was here, and you probably should not share your desktop anymore. So be aware if you're file sharing that should be turned off when you're on a public network. The other thing is to secure your own network. I said don't worry about your own network, but if you leave the default passwords, that's not always the best thing. So when you get a new router, change the password on it. Make sure you're using at least WPA 128-bit encryption on your network. Right? Because think about it. Let's say that you were going to do something bad. Now, of course, you never would, but let's say you were going to do something bad. Would you use your own home network, or would you use your wide open neighbor's network? Well, you'd probably use your neighbor's network. So by securing yourself, you're protecting your own internet account. And that's a really important thing. So there's another thing that I like to bring up during these lectures, because I actually think it's something useful and not a lot of people know about it. It's called virtual private network technology, or VPN technology. And it originally started because sometimes people need to work remotely and they want to create an encrypted connection from their computer to their work so that they can actually access resources as if they were at work from home. So they're basically creating a tunnel that goes directly to work, and then they're accessing the internet and everything through their work location. Well, you can also do this where you can pay for this service to exist. And you're saying, well, why does this matter? Well, I have a perfect example. My father-in-law likes to travel to South America, and he spends probably a third to half the year down in South America every year. Well, he can't get his AT&T email down there because it's locked out most of the time. So he uses a VPN to connect back to California using one of these services. He then accesses the internet through California. So it's a tunnel from South America to California, and then he accesses the open internet from California, in which case he can get all his email. So you can actually change your physical location using a service like this, and by doing that, get access to services that you might need to have access to, right? Some people use this to, watch TV from somewhere else. Some people use this to access internet content from another company, or another country. And it might be something that you're interested in. Private internet access is a great one. There's a bunch of them out there. You can Google them. Some of them offer extra privacy. Now, is that privacy or anonymity from, the NSA? Probably not. But is it general privacy? Yeah, absolutely. So if you wanted to be more private, accessing through a VPN is a way of making yourself a little bit less obvious. So this is kind of how it works. There's your computer. This is the typical connection. It's you to the internet. When you do it through a VPN, you're encrypted and tunneled to the VPN, and then you're coming out after the VPN to the internet. So let's see, before we go on to passwords here, I'm gonna hit escape and get out of my lecture for just a second, I hope. Hold on. And I'm gonna show you how this works, because I think it's actually worth kind of seeing it, okay? So you have a browser here, and if I were gonna go to Google, for example, right, we'd see the standard Google homepage. Likewise, there's a website, it's called IPleak.net. There we go. That'll tell us what our IP address is, right? And then it'll tell us information. Like I'm in, of course, it's not being very accurate because it says I'm in Chicago, which I shouldn't be. Do I have it on? No. Right, here's a Google map based on your IP address, so you can get information. Now, why it's telling me I'm in this, anyway, this is failing my lecture here because it usually tells you exactly where you are, but it does tell me I'm in the United States. Now, if I were to connect to another country and repeat this, so let me get in here, right, and let's change to a different country here. Come on. Okay, let's see here. All right, so let's say we're in Japan. Okay, so now I'm connected through a VPN into Japan. If I were to go to Google and just type in google.com, it should take me to the Japanese version of Google. And if we were to go to IPleak and we're to refresh this, right, it's now telling me that I'm in Tokyo. It's information based on that address. So I'm able to shift my location to a different location, should I need to. So most people don't know about this, so I always feel like it's worth showing it or explaining it because it has real world use. elsewhere. Okay, so let's shift into passwords. So this is something I'm very passionate about, and I think you all should think very carefully about going forward. So passwords are really something to take seriously. So there are billions of passwords that have been hacked in these companies. You hear about it happening. Oh, Target got hacked or whatever. And you're like, it's not that big a deal. Like, I don't really care. The problem is that when one of these companies gets hacked, those passwords are now out in the open. And so if you were going to try to hack your way into somebody's account, you would use one of the 1.2 billion passwords that's already a known password first before you moved on to the unknown passwords. You wouldn't start with A12. You'd go into all the, my dog Fido 123s first. So the average internet user has 27 accounts and only 6.5 passwords. Maybe you have the ultra secure one for your bank, but then the rest of them are basically recycled the same password. Most normal passwords can be cracked in 90 seconds or less, especially if you use some social engineering, because it's usually a name plus a year. So 1 in 10 passwords, 10% of all passwords are a name plus a year. So when I'm talking about this, think about how many of these apply to you and the passwords that you are using. 2 in 1,000 passwords is the word password. That's scary. Love is the most common verb in a password. It's 12 times more common than hate. The most popular adjectives that are used are sexy, hot, and pink. Faster computers lead to faster password cracking. Okay, so they make these special computers that are designed to do this. It's a bunch of GPUs that are stacked together. This particular one that right now, this is the fast one, can try 8.2 billion password combinations per second. That's a lot, right? The more passwords that are leaked, discovered, hacked, etc., the smarter the cracking programs become, because they figure out patterns. And that's the big thing. This is the computer that does it. So it's not very attractive, but it's really high powered specifically for this. So these are tricks that people use. They say, oh, I'm going to get really complicated passwords. So they do stuff like this, right? This is mustache forward and backward. Now, for me, I don't think I could even spell mustache forward, let alone backward, right? But they create words forwards and backwards. Well, that doesn't work. Number letter substitutions. The E becomes a 3, right? But the other thing that happens is the programs say, oh, well, you need to have special characters. So you do these kinds of substitutions. You put 3 exclamation marks at the end. Well, that's a pretty known strategy. If you've come up with it, it's probably a known strategy and worth thinking about. You can do any combination of these strategies. They're going to try those strategies first before they brute force. So how do you do this? Don't use the same password twice. So you never recycle a password. And you say, well, wait a minute, that's really hard. How do I keep track of it? Well, you have to use a password manager to do it. And it's built into a lot of the operating systems now. It's built into Chrome if you want to use their password tracking. It's built into Apple products through Keychain, right? So this is something that's becoming very, very common, where you let the computer manage the password. You want to use a password that contains numbers, letters, and symbols, assuming the website allows it. And you want the password completely random. The more random it is, the better, because it's just a string of numbers. So it shouldn't be something that you should memorize, or that you're going to be able to memorize. Great question, saying, I thought those password managers weren't secure. It's a good point. So you have to read how they work, what their terms of service are, and how they protect your data. Apple's making a very strong case for their password management through Keychain, saying they're taking your privacy very seriously, but it does involve a certain amount of trust. The alternative to that would be to write these random strings in a notebook somewhere, and then you keep the notebook. At some point, you have to trust the technology, depending on how you do it. So there are different options. The password manager I use personally is a program called 1Password. I've read through all their fine print. I think they're very secure. That's my opinion. That doesn't mean it's a fact, but I like it and I've used it. The thing that I like about it is cross-platform. So I can use it on all my Mac products, but I can also flip it over into a Windows computer and run it on that too. So given how many computers I run, it works out really nicely for me. There are other examples here: LastPass, KeePass, Dashlane. You can look at any one of those as a password manager as well. So this is what 1Password looks like, where it keeps track of your passwords. It'll generate the random password. It'll generate random security questions. That's another one that happens is, when you log into a website, and banks are particularly used, they do this, here's the security questions. Who's your best friend? What's your pet's name? Well, if anybody has connections to you on Facebook, they can probably figure out who your best friend was, what your pet's name was, all those kinds of social engineered questions. So really on those security questions, you should use something completely random. Oops. Sorry, you should use something completely random like that as an answer. Something that you couldn't guess rather than something that you could guess. So a good password manager is going to encrypt your passwords such that they're not seeing the passwords, it's only you. And you, of course, need to have a master password that lets you in to that list of passwords. The more we use fingerprint ID, face ID, and whatever, the easier it is to kind of not remember that master password. I suggest that you figure out a master password that's, maybe 16 to 20 characters, completely random, and you just type it enough times to memorize it. Because then it's very, very secure. Generate those complex random passwords. That's what these password managers do. And they keep a separate password for every online account. They're not reusing it. So that right there is when Target gets hacked. If you've only ever used that one password for Target, it doesn't apply to all the rest of your account somewhere else because it's unique. So the other thing that certainly banks have started doing now, that's much better than the random security question of what's your dog's favorite toy or whatever those are, is that you do two-factor authentication. And this is really becoming very, very standard. It's something that you're going to see more and more of going forward. And that is that you put your password in and it says, I'm going to text you with a one-time code, and you need to put that code in to be able to log in. So it's verifying not only that you know the password, but that you have access to your equipment, the phone or whatever that you're going to receive the text message on. So it's a little bit more cumbersome, but it does dramatically increase the security because you have to have access to that two-factor authentication. Sometimes they go a little far. I think Google's starting to get really restrictive right now, where you have to, log into your account. Here's a number, wait for, YouTube app on your phone to open, and then confirm the number on your phone. Like at some point it becomes too complicated. I think the verification number by text, that's reasonable. Identity theft. So this is another big one that's happening out there. It may not have happened to you yet, but it probably will. So obviously I'm really big on security. I have complex passwords. I'm very secure when it comes to my computer. I had this happen to me. So 9 million Americans had their identity stolen each year. 15 billion was stolen. It can happen to you. So for me, here's the big thing. I used all of my strong passwords, secure the digital world, nobody's getting hacked, but I neglected my physical world. So I had just a regular mailbox out in front of my house. People stole mail, and they used that to open a $25,000 personal loan, to buy cell phones in LA, to open a Comcast account in Houston, to apply for a Sears credit card and charge, I don't know, it was like $20,000. This stuff happens, and it's crazy. Now, the good news is I called my bank, and obviously I was off the hook, but I had to file a police report. I had to go through all this information, and it all came from the fact that somehow they stole my mail. Right? It sounds like somebody's going through the same process. Right? It happens, and it's kind of crazy that it happens, but it's something to be aware of. If you're not aware of, if you're not actively checking what's happening under your name, you can be a victim and not know about it. So there's a website out there, it's free, it's called Credit Karma. It's worth creating an account and check your credit. See how many hard inquiries you have. If you've got weird inquiries from, Houston, they probably aren't you. Right? Sometimes people use credit card readers. They put little readers over where you stick your credit card in, and they read your credit card. Right? It can happen. I know that's happened to some of my friends at gas stations, for example. And this is starting to get really paranoid, but at a gas station, if you're going to stick your credit card in, always grab the card reader and see if it pulls off first. because they just clip a card reader over the top of it. So you just grab it and see if it pulls off before you stick your card in. Just something to be aware of, because it definitely does happen. And that's how they can get your credit card and, you know, make some charges or whatever. So something like Credit Karma is not a bad strategy. Branding yourself. Now, really, I promise I'm almost done. I know we're almost out of time. But you want to think about who you are and what your online identity is. If you don't build your own identity, if you don't cultivate your own brand, the brand of you, Google's going to return it for you. They're going to figure it out for you. So I'm in the middle of lecture, so I'm not going to actually ask you to do this. But when we get done today, do a Google search on your name. Grant Adams, enter. What do you find? Right? Well, for me, it turns out I died in a suntanning bed accident. So this stuff is kind of crazy, but there are a lot of people out there that share your name. Now, if you have a really unique name, yeah, you're generally pretty safe. But if you have a common name, it's pretty likely that there are other people with that name. I think I was a football star too. I wasn't, but you know, it sounds like I was. So those are all things to keep track of and be aware of. And as you go forward, if you brand yourself, when somebody types in Grant Adams architecture, they should be able to see me. They should see information about me. So I know it sounds silly, but Google yourself and see what comes up. So how do you go about establishing an identity? How do you brand yourself? You could buy a domain name. You could use a uniform username across all sites. If you buy that domain name, you control it. Costs about $12 a year. And you're not subject to sites going out of business or changing their terms or whatever. So you could actually use that domain name long term. You want to, if you're going to choose that domain name, you want to think about how it's going to reflect on you. You can have up to 67 characters, but it's really long. I think Digital Tools for Architects is too long, but that's what it was. DTFA was gone, right? .com, .org, .biz, .us, .net, etc. That's the extension. You can think about that. You can get creative about how you use it. If you're looking for it, you can do a search for that, see if that exists as a website name or not. And you want to make it something that's memorable. Sometimes it's about your own name. So I have grantadams.net, for example. That's my personal landing page. It's part of branding me. So I'm controlling what's shown. If you want to go and do it, you're going to go to a registrar. This is somebody responsible for registering that domain name, putting it into the phone book, so to speak. You purchase that name and you tell it where it goes. What's your host? Where's that computer that it goes to? Right? Now you have a valid name, and all you need is a website going forward. There's a bunch of registrars out there. Namecheap is a great one. Some of the other ones, I'm sure you've seen advertisements for GoDaddy before. Those are all just options for hosting your own website and or domain. You heard me mention personal landing page before. This is a page that you control that contains links to other pages and encompasses who you are as a person, encompasses who your identity is, and it lets you kind of brand yourself. You could send somebody to that website and say, this is me. You could see my project, my work, it's all related to that particular page. So you can actively manage your identity. You can claim the projects and sites that belong to you, and it controls, or it helps control, how the internet sees you. I can tell you right now that if you're applying for a job, you're applying for a scholarship, a lot of times the people that are interviewing you or evaluating your fitness for a scholarship, they'll look at you on Facebook. They'll look at you on Instagram. They'll try to find you in any of the social media channels and see who you are as a person, beyond just what's on your resume. So how you choose to reflect yourself really, really matters. Right? So the more you cross-brand, the more Google's going to associate. So if you have a personal landing page and on your other pages you put a link to that, the more it's going to start to associate who you are. Okay, so you can update your profiles to include that personal landing page, and then you continue to post comments and content as you go forward. I'm going to make one little note, and I know Facebook is like so out now. Nobody cares about Facebook anymore, but it's just moved to different platforms. And if I don't hit the right platform, if you're on, Instagram or Snapchat or something that I failed to mention correctly, this warning applies to all of it. So whenever you're posting something about yourself, someone else can find it. And I don't care how secure these sites say they are, how locked down they are. Oh, only your friends are going to see it. Once you post something online, it exists. Somebody has it, somebody has access to it, and it's going to come back. So think about what you're posting and whether you would want your future employer in 5 years to see that. So it might be funny now, but it might not be later on. I've heard many, many stories about people who apply for and receive a scholarship and then have it yanked because of things they posted online that weren't acceptable. So think about what you're posting and how it reflects you. So I just have to put that out there as a warning because it does matter and it will exist for all time. I'm thankful that my college days didn't have this, right? The other thing you can do if you have a domain name is you can set up a specific email, and this is a lot more professional than a gmail.com. You can have grant@digitaltoolsforarchitects.com or any one of your other domain names. And it just helps with your professional setup. You can do this through Google services, Zoho services. There's a bunch of them out there. You can obviously build your own website, and all of these do cost a little bit of money every month to do, but it also increases your professional face, I think, going forward. So there's your if you wanted to set this up through a Google Apps, etc. We'll skip through that. And then really the key is that once you get your brand kind of figured out, you're not worried about your branding anymore. You're just trying to build content and post content and show who you are as a person. And then all of the systems that you've set up will then feed yourself back and feed your identity going forward. The last thing that I'll mention is LinkedIn. I'm not a big social media person. I don't actually like pushing social media. The problem is that now, if you're going for a job, if you're going for any kind of a internship or whatever, LinkedIn has become this kind of standard. Where's your LinkedIn page? It's basically like your resume. And so I don't believe in all the connections and all that stuff. However, I think it's so commonplace now if you're looking for a job that you really should consider having a LinkedIn page. So as part of our exercise, and I'm going to shift over to that right now for today. So let me go into our assignments here. Oh, whoops, I need to move it up here into exercises. Sorry about that. I'll do that. I'm going to ask you, part one, we're going to talk about calendars. Just get yourself organized. Again, you don't have to do anything. You don't have to prove anything. You don't have to show me anything. But I'd like you to try to get yourself organized. Spend some time. I'm giving you the time to get organized right now. Right. Part two, we talked about consolidating email accounts. If you never check your school email account, consider forwarding it to your personal account, just so you know everything gets to the right place. If you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it. Remember, all of these today are optional. Part three here, I'm asking you to work on your LinkedIn resume. If you don't want to do it, if you don't feel like you want to have a LinkedIn page, totally fine with me. It wouldn't be a bad idea to actually create a resume though. So you could do it in Word or something. So spend a little bit of time and think about a resume, right? And then the last part here, there's really two parts that are really useful. And I think a lot of times people don't do this. And that is that you can upload a profile picture to Canvas if you haven't already done it. And that means that you'll have a little picture when you're on Canvas and it kind of associates who you are. There's a face to what you are, right? And the other is to upload a profile picture to Zoom. So if I were to turn my camera off, right? Let's see. Well, I'm sharing the screen right now, so I can't really do it. There it is. Stop video. Right? When I stop the video, you'll see that I have a little profile picture that shows up. And of course, now I lost my Zoom link. Hold on. Sometimes. I'm going to stop the share for just a second. So I can get back. Yeah, there you go. So you can see that I have a little profile picture that shows up. Some of you have some profile pictures. Some of you have like, letters on your names or whatever. Take that same profile picture that you use for Canvas and upload it as your background in Zoom. Not as your background, but as your profile in Zoom. It just associates a face and it helps you be a little bit more personal when you're going through this stuff. Now, that being said, remember that whatever you're choosing as your picture should be an appropriate picture, right? Appropriate and professional. Same thing with the Canvas photo. You know, you don't want the picture of you sitting at the bar, whatever. Pick a professional picture because it's your public face and what you're showing the world, right? So upload those 2 pictures. On Wednesday, we're going to talk about cameras, phones, taking pictures, etc., compositional strategies. That's in exercise 103. So it wouldn't be a bad idea for you to have access to a phone or a camera at that point. Remember, there is no official post for exercise 102. There's nothing you have to show for that. And also, you need to attend 1 lab check-in each week. So this week, we're starting with our lab check-ins. So you can come to any one of the sessions. There's 6 total sessions. A few of you have made special arrangements with me. That's fine. We'll go through those, on a personal basis. But for everybody else, you have those 6 times, Monday or Wednesday. I don't care which day you come to. What we're going to be discussing during those sessions is making sure that you have your Creative Cloud installed and you don't have any questions about the class. So it's not a really long one this week, but you need to make sure you attend at least one of those. Okay, so with that, I'm going to go ahead. Let me stop my share. I should have started my video back again. There we go. Unless anybody has any global questions, I'll start to see you guys in the check-ins. The first one begins at 9:10, and I'll see you then.